I was a bit surprised to hear the GT 1030 being labeled a meme card. To me, that honor is reserved to the GT 710s and 730s. So does the GT 1030 perform that bad when it comes to budget gaming? And what does it take for a card to become a meme? This KFA2 variant of the GT 1030 uses GDDR5, unlike the Asus card we examined 2 years ago. This means that this GPU, with all details seen on screen right now, is not going to suffer that much compared to the one on the Phoenix board. The card doesn't use more than 30 watts of power. You think that this would make almost any form of cooling adequate, but you'd be wrong. The Asus low profile variant gets the hottest of them, thanks to the dinky heatsink and even dinkier fan. 65C in heaven for a delta over ambient of 40C. Compared to it, the solution employed by KFA2 is gargantuan, and this reflects in both the temperatures that are about 3C lower and the noise levels, much more reduced for the latter card. Unlike the latest reviewed cards, none of the selected games and settings will have the GPU being bottlenecked by the test system. Yes, we're still on the i7-4770 equivalent Xeon and 32GB of DDR3 running in dual channel at 1600 MHz. Rainbow Six Siege is the first to point out that the card may actually be a meme. The only resolution and rendering scale that managed to get the 1% lows above 60 FPS is 1280 by 720 and 50%. This is quite sobering. This is a multiplayer game, a quite competitive one for that matter, so just having the average above 60 might not be good enough. Doom Eternal, oh dear. 720 resolution and low settings is not low enough to have this card running at an acceptable level. The average FPS is still in the teens and I am aiming for the 1% lows to go above 60. This is not going to do it. Doom Eternal plays better with the FPS stays above 60 and the GT 1030 falters. Fallout 4 is the first title that has my faith restored in the GT 1030. 1080 resolution and low settings has the card averaging 38 FPS in Diamond City, and the 1% lows manages the console-like 30 FPS. I was afraid that this latter metric will be worse in the outside scenes, as noticed in the latest reviewed Radeons. This was not the case, the 1% lows did not change, but the average went up to low 50s. Apex Legends becomes playable, meaning 1% lows above 60 FPS, only at 720 resolution and low settings. The average goes in the mid-80s, while those aforementioned percentile lows stay in the low 60s. The slightest bump in resolution to 1600 by 900 has the average and 1% lows drop by about 20 FPS. Going then to 1080 is accompanied by a much smaller drop in performance. 720 to 900 seems to push the card beyond what its 64-bit memory bus and 4 PCI lanes can handle. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is playable only at 720 resolution and the low settings, and while the average FPS is fine at 43, the 1% low struggle to reach 30. 29 is fine though, this is a stealth single-player game after all, but again, the 1030 is relegated to 720p. This time around, the limited performance in CS2 is not due to a platform bottleneck. This time it all boils down to the GPU. As seen on screen right now, only 720 resolution and low settings manages a 1% loss of above 60 FPS. FSR was disabled and my test run involves me doing a tour on the Dust map. The average FPS was a surprisingly 105 FPS and the 1% lows managed mid-60s. This is actually good for a little display adapter. After seeing the results at 720 resolution and very low settings, I was ready to declare Borderlands 3 a 720 resolution only game for the 1030. The average of 51 FPS was more than what I hoped for, but the 1% loss of 36 didn't encourage me to go to 1600 by 900. I am happy that I did though. The small Pascal chip managed 40 FPS for the average and 31 for the 1% lows. It felt nice to see the card running above 720p again. Despite the 1% lows not reaching 60 FPS, I will declare XDefiant as playable. The average FPS reached the low 90s and a few small drops below 60 won't bring the end of the world. To achieve this performance, some sacrifices had to be made. The resolution is only 1280 by 720 and the quality options were turned down to low. Resident Evil 4 is not a game for the GT 1030. I will commend the card for the average FPS of 31 at 720 resolution and low settings. As for the 1% lows, I mean come on, what did you expect? This is a 30W 2GB display adapter and the RE4 Remake is not known for being easy to run. Fortnite is very likely one of the reasons why people buy this card to begin with. In performance mode, the tiny Pascal card will provide playable frame rates at 1600 by 900 and 720 resolutions. That is if you aim for 21% lows to be above 60. The average FPS is 92 and 116 respectively, with the percentile metric 61 and 71 respectively. Reload has a much smaller map, and more than once this led to the bottleneck moving from the GPU to the CPU. No such thing with the GT 1030, as the card didn't reach as high as 200 FPS. At best, the card averaged almost 180 FPS at 720 resolution, and at 1080, the average was just shy of 130 FPS. The 1% lows were surprisingly good at about 70% of the average, and the game experience was good, except me being eliminated quite quickly. Terminator resistance runs quite well on the GT 1030 at 1080 resolution and low settings. Both the average of 52 FPS and the 1% lows of 37 provide a good gaming experience. Medium settings require a drop in resolution to 1600 by 900 for the game to remain playable. The frame rate is similar to 1080 low. High settings is also possible, but it requires yet another drop in resolution to 720. The average and 1% lows stay in the same ballpark of low 50s and high 30s to low 40s respectively. Just like with most of the cards tested, Overwatch 2 scales linearly with the drop in resolution. The settings used were low with no anti-aliasing, and the average FPS ranges between 86 at 1080 resolution and 166 at 720. The 1% lows metric remain at a pleasant 70% from the average, and the game experience is good. Dota 2 averages in the mid-90s and the 1% lows manage 51 FPS. The test consisted in running a match replay at 1080 resolution and low settings. This would then set a 3D resolution scale significantly lower than 100%, so I enabled the advanced options and pulled the slider back to 100. Before everybody starts to cheer for the 1030, I'd like to point out that Dota 2 is a weird test. Quite frequently, cards that are more powerful than the 1030 fail to go above 90 FPS on average. Control is a game that had the 1030 perform worse than the older HD 7770. At 720 rendering resolution and low settings, the Pascal card managed an average of 35 FPS. The 1% lows, however, had a strong negative impact on the game experience. 26 FPS does not feel good no matter how you look at it. 1080 resolution and low settings will allow the GT 1030 to reach an average of 90 FPS in GTA 5. The 1% lows is a more than acceptable 57, and the game experience is just fine. There is a little bit of room to enhance the visuals, but that's just about it. Also, keep in mind that these statistics were gathered in the last benchmark run. The game experience in Warframe is also pretty good, 125 FPS for the average and 84 for the 1% lows. These numbers were gathered in a single player run through the Mariana mission at 1080 resolution and low settings. Performance may vary in other locations. Still, there is a bit of performance headroom here, and the game is a single player title, so consider increasing the visual quality options. I cannot see how the GT 1030 is in the same tier as the Fermi GT 730. The latter struggles with most of the games I tested, even the older ones and even at 720 resolution. At least the Pascal card can play just fine the online popular games selected, and some of them at a resolution higher than 1280 by 720. Still, you won't see anybody using a GT 1030 and enjoying a match of the finals or Far Cry 6 anytime soon. So, not a meme, but definitely on the path of becoming one. But performance aside, is the price that rubs me the wrong way. 20 USD? Okay. But 40? There are quite a few alternatives that will outperform this card easily. Sure, some might require some extra power via a 6-pin cable, but if the extra power is an issue, there are still plenty of options that can run without. So in my opinion, the GT 1030 is still an okay card. Its only issues are the sellers that seem to think that it's worth the same price they paid for it 3-4 years ago. Anyway, enough of me ranting. This is it for this video. Thank you for your time, I hope you liked it, and I'll see you for the